Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I am very excited about today's guest. Pat, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so for the uninitiated, for people who don't know, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Pat Piccolo. I am a traditional sign painter by trade. I'm also a full-time parent and foster parent, and that takes up so much of my life right there. But I also try to do other fun things too. So
Awesome. All right, let's start professionally. I
yeah.
want to talk about like specifically what you do, the industry, like because it's a very interesting industry. I want to talk about that, how you got into it, talk a bit about your career, how you built it up, how you built up the business, and then let's go into the personal after that.
Great.
All right, so tell us what's the name of your company?
I actually have just totally avoided any kind of company name, and it's really just me. Like, I'm the person you talk to on the phone, I'm the person that reads the emails, and it's just my name on the card. So I've decided to, you know, not expand yet. And especially because I don't have like a storefront. I do have a separate shop, but I have it as kind of an appointment only thing. And so I've kept it where it's just me. So my email is signs by Patrick, Patrick the sign painter, Pat the brush guy, that kind of thing.
How do
So
people even find out about you?
99% of it seems to be word of mouth. Um, you know, uh, a lot of my clients are people that I've known for, many, many years, who decide to open up a small business of their own, like RJ with Timeless. Um, uh, I paint a lot of signs for RJ. And, you know, people see me doing it. It takes longer than slapping up some stickers on a window. So I'm there kind of all day doing something. And the neighboring businesses see me, people walking by see me. I've got a little sign that I've painted that people can take a picture of that has my contact info. And that, I feel like that is really the best way for me to do any kind of advertising because there's no question asked about like what exactly I do. You're seeing me do it. You see the finished product. You see me. You can chat with me, and it's really personal. I find people who have a business that wants to cater towards something handmade or unique. They want their sign to also be handmade and unique because why would you want like some computer generated thing to sell some handcrafted goods? So yeah, then I would say that another good portion comes from like social media, Instagram, um, which really is just kind of an offshoot of that if you think about it. People will tag me in their posts and they'll see it and I'll get messages through there and I'm terrible at responding on Instagram, so I'm like, please email me.
So, like, tell us about the industry. Like,
Yeah,
what is, because, like, what you do is very traditional. It
yeah,
comes from, like, a long history of it. So, what is sign, because you also do murals, right?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so tell us
yeah.
about the industry.
Yeah, it really runs the gamut. I kind of say I do pretty much anything with a brush. Um, and a big portion of what I do will be a large scale, duplication of somebody's existing logo or for like corporate clients, I'll paint a mural that somebody else designed and they're like, okay, we want this mural here at this size. And that's kind of really the bread and butter of a lot of what I do. Because not everything can be done with like a vinyl mask, which is one technique that's not a traditional way to do it, where you like like it's similar to silk screening and they'll just like roll over the vinyl mask instead of going in with a brush and painting it. But not all surfaces, and of course not all not at every scale is that even economical. And so there's, even though it is a niche thing, there is still like a practicality component to a lot of what I do, especially when I'm, working on large scale like that. So um, I try to use that portion of my work to kind of be the base of it, and then I can really focus on the stuff that I really enjoy, which is the design aspect of it, because I really like to do traditional design, whether it's lettering or traditional style murals. Like I try to do stuff that's more mid-century, like WPA style, or like something that you would see like faded, ghosted out from a mural or a image that was painted for commercial purposes 70 years ago or something like that. So
Yeah, because it's clear, like not just what you're saying now, but also when we were talking before the show started, you care about the history of what you did, what you do, and also we're talking about how it's like it kind of has a lot of meeting points with tattoos, with tattoo culture.
yeah.
So for someone who's like total like neophyte, never heard of this stuff, like what is it specifically that the industry does? Like, cause like when we're hearing murals, I've always wondered, even from a little kid, it's like, how the hell do they do these things?
Yeah.
So like, what's the history of it? And like, what is it specifically?
Sure. I mean, the history of it really started, 200-300 years ago in the way that we can recognize it. Introduction of the printing press made, the availability of the written word, and people understood, and you didn't have to do pictorial signs anymore. And so lettering as an art form really blossomed, and kind of post-industrial revolution, daring industrial revolution a little bit, you started seeing the artistic side of lettering come out as the population became more literate. And so I always kind of think of that time period as the real birth of sign painting as we know it. Because prior to that, it would be like you'd have a pub with a fox and goose, and there'd literally be a picture of a fox and a goose. Or like, King George's would be just like a picture of King George, because a lot of the population wasn't literate. And so once literacy really started to blossom, you started to see, more lettering, and you wanted to have more ways of differentiating your product or whatever it is that you're trying to emphasize. And yeah, I feel like that was the real birth. And, in a pre-computer era, all of that was done, by hand using, math, sometimes using a brush, using rollers when those were invented. But, done with a person sitting at a desk, then moving to an easel, then moving to a wall. So I think for me personally, I really try to honor the traditional methods of sign painting, not just going out there with my quill brush and lettering. Like that's the kind of end product, and that's great to do that by hand. Like that's a skill within itself. But I've always had a keen interest in hand drafting, opposed to drafting stuff out on the computer. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. I mean, I definitely utilize computers when, a client sends me their digital file of their logo or something like that. And I can go at it from that angle. But if somebody were to come to me and be like, I have this project idea, I really utilize everything I know about the kind of more, antiquated ways of doing graphic design and, traditional methods of sign painting, where I start out with a piece of paper and a pencil and kind of go from there. I have like a library of, physical books with different alphabets, and have spent many years studying layout and that kind of stuff. And I try to incorporate all of that and create something that, ends up being really unique and clearly different than something that would be created on a computer. To me, and to other people who, pay attention to that kind of stuff, can notice the little differences. So, yeah.
First of all, that's like when you connected that, the creation of the printing press and literacy becoming more widespread, and that idea, because I was going to ask you, like, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was like, does that mean that signs literally were before, like, like a fox and a hen?
Yeah.
That is wild.
Yeah.
And it also is like, once something changes, I was just talking about this with some clients yesterday. Like once something changes, it's like almost impossible to remember when it wasn't like that. So we were talking about smartphones.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you had said to someone like, I don't know, like however, like 20 years ago, or maybe I guess 30 now, where it's like, oh yeah, you're going to have all this stuff on the phone. They'd be like, that sounds crazy.
Right.
But now I could never imagine not having that.
Right.
And it's just such a thing. So it's like the printing press creates this change that's like for you and I, it's so long ago. Of course, we're not going to think about it, but like there literally was a time where it's like books were handwritten. Mm-hmm. Or I guess there were other methods of printing, but they were done in shorter runs. Right. And then you've got something like the printing press.
Right.
Changes everything, increases literacy, huge leap forward for people. But how that would change how businesses communicate with their clients is insane. I would have never thought of that.
And changed our visual landscape. Like if you think about a pre-advertisement city compared to a city in the turn of the last century, it would look completely different. Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think about.
Well, and also the way that people communicate with their clients,
yeah,
and kind of attract attention to their businesses. I'd imagine the impact of technology has continued to play in. So I'm like already thinking of like neon signs. Mm-hmm. And now at one point, at least when I was a kid, like neon signs were a huge thing where they seem like less prevalent now.
Right. Yeah. And also created things like, city codes and regulations regarding advertisement and what was actually allowed and what wasn't allowed. I think the neon sign was like pretty much the, nail in the coffin for creating city ordinances, because you had these like really loud, bright things, and some people felt like it really blighted the city, and sometimes maybe it did. I think it's kind of cool to see those pictures of cityscapes where it's just so much neon and crazy stuff. And neon is always hand bent too. That's something that you don't think about. Like all the neon you see, that's actually a person that is there bending it. Sometimes it happens like in assembly line style in China now, but it's still people.
That's crazy. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's like a whole nother thing, and it's also really cool. And I have no experience with it, but it's on my bucket list to someday incorporate neon into my business too. So yeah.
So like a business like yours and an industry like this, it's a niche thing. Mm-hmm. But it seems like, with technology moving faster and faster and faster, or more ways for people to like connect with people and make them aware of what they're doing, it's kind of like vinyl records. It's like vinyl kind of seemed like it was going away, but then it was like, no, people have that connection to vinyl. There's that personal connection to it. Is that similar to?
That's a super good analogy, in my opinion. I've tried to use that before when explaining. I think in the mid to late 80s, vinyl lettering became a thing and started to replace just people coming in and doing hand lettering for things like window signs. And, they've really used vinyl everywhere. Most signs you see these days are some sort of vinyl, like adhesive sticker, like if you look on a lot of windows and stuff. And that like pretty much killed traditional sign painting. Everybody one day was like, I can do 10 jobs in a day where I used to be able to do one. They just put their brushes down, and these are people that had spent years trying to master the craft, and they just stopped. Like it's kind of a phenomenal thing. Like the economic impact of this computerized printing machine like killed a craft almost overnight. Like it really took a few saltworts and a long time of a landscape with less and less hand painted signs for people to kind of understand that there was a visual impact, there was an aesthetic loss with that, and there was also the death of a craft. And I think sign painting was probably at its lowest in the like mid to late 90s before it started to kind of pick up again. And I think certain businesses, like, I think we were talking about tattooing earlier, like tattoo shops were one of the mainstays for traditional sign painters for a long time to kind of weather that weird lull when after the computer and the vinyl lettering came and just destroyed the industry and destroyed the craft, because I think tattooers really resonated with traditional sign painting and even dabbled in it a lot, because some of the techniques are really similar, and visually the aesthetic is pretty similar. And I was getting tattooed as like a younger person, and I was talking to my friend who was tattooing me, and he was like, yeah, this old guy told me the other day that the 3 least respected arts are graffiti, tattooing, and sign painting. And I was like, what? Like, it really planted the seed for me. And this was probably 2002, 2003, or something like that. And I was like, that's a pretty bold statement and interesting. And I think at the time was really true. And I think that the perception of all 3 of those things in the past 20 years has really shifted. And I think people have a lot more respect in general for all 3 of those art forms. And I'm kind of riding that wave career-wise.
What you just said stands out to me because, like, graffiti, like, I mean, I remember coming up, like growing up as a little kid and only hearing about graffiti in like a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, so it's not like I grew up somewhere where there was like graffiti was everywhere and you would have seen like kind of like poor examples of it and then like amazing examples of it. I can't imagine. Growing up in Calgary, I don't know if I saw good or bad. It's just like, but I only heard about it in a negative way.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And then tattooing, again, when I was growing up, it was like bad people have tattoos. Yep. It's terrible. And then hand-painted signs, it's like I grew up in the time of like neon signs or lit signs. I don't really recall having like a lot of connection to like hand-painted signs when I was young. However, now as an adult, or not even as an adult, but in this time in this place and time, it's like graffiti writing. Like, I think everyone, even people who are like maybe a little bit more old school in their thinking or a little bit more rulesy, like they can look at graffiti and be like, damn, that's like pretty amazing. That's super
Even
weird.
my father-in-law has favorite graffiti artists, and he's like total just like boomer, like pretty straight and narrow guy. And he's like, I really like that Gats piece over there. And I'm like, cool, Richard, that's awesome.
The fact that someone can look, like, you can look at something and be like, objectively, that's super cool, but also because the history of it is so much more accessible now. Mm-hmm. And you can be like, oh, like graffiti culture is super interesting and really cool. And there were like people who were doing things that literally changed the landscape of the city in a way that made it like interesting and magical. So that's cool, right? Yeah. And now I think someone growing up, like kids, like our kids, would grow up probably having a favorable impression of graffiti, where it was like, for us, it was like we were taught negative things about it.
Totally.
Tattooing, it's like everyone has tattoos now, like it's really celebrated, it's really respected, but again, the culture and history of it is really accessible now. Mm-hmm. Sign painting. So when Ross, and shout out to Ross, you're the best, first suggested you as a guest, I was like, that is such a cool idea, like hand-painted signs. Like, what an interesting craft, what an interesting art. And I can definitely say, if I see a hand-painted sign, I'm like, oh, I take a moment, I just look at it, I'm interested in it. But the history, I've never like, it seems like you'd have to like be interested in knowing about the history to hear about the history, where about graffiti or tattoo culture, it's kind of like accessible and everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the history of it was part of what was intriguing to me. Like I studied history in college and, didn't do art in college, but I did paint graffiti for years. And it all really felt like it came together to where I am today. And there are so many really famous and good graffiti writers that make their living painting signs.
Really?
Yeah. And just like many pop artists of the like 50s and 60s were commercial artists by trade. You know, it goes hand in hand in a lot of ways. So
And another thing you talked about that I want to hit on because it's just like it just lit up a bunch of stuff for me is the idea of changing the aesthetic of the space that you live in.
yeah,
And that shift of hand painted signs going away to kind of at least computerized things, which I agree with you. It's not like a good or a bad thing. It's just it changes the way a space looks. But what really got me thinking was like, you know, if you think of like a city, you think of architecture, right? And Monica and I are both we like kind of mid-century modern houses, you know, so we're like big fans of Palm Springs.
yeah,
So you go and there's that kind of a sense of place around it. I hadn't really thought of the role that sign painting would play in that, but it's like graffiti plays into that, sign painting plays into that, architecture plays into that, like, you know, like how gardens are done plays into it. Again,
yeah.
where we live, the area we live in, Vancouver, has a lot of like really big, lush gardens. It's like known for that. A space isn't, I guess, like in my thinking, because I'm not like an artistic person, a space is just kind of like exists. You know, like I don't really think a lot about what goes into making it exist.
Yeah.
But sign painting would be a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And even if you don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about it, I guarantee you that you notice it if something is different or something is weird. So yeah.
Well, I think about it like in the most subliminal way, like I like this or I don't
Right.
like this, but I don't think of the hours and the intention behind it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It definitely all matters, and yeah, I think that one of the coolest things about my job is that I kind of get that little rush that I would get when I was painting graffiti, when I would be like cruising around town and seeing all of these things that I painted. I can do that now, but you know, I'm getting paid for it, and I'm increasing the property value instead of decreasing the property value.
Totally, man. Totally. Well, and you're also like, if we think of something like Timeless, which is like for anyone listening, Timeless is coffee shops in the Bay Area that are just like ran by a wonderful person. It's a great, really, really great series of coffee shops, and it's also about like helping the visual representation of someone who's worked so hard at something that's so cool and special to so many people, but being able to represent that in the sign.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love being able to be more of a community member by literally having my hand on all of these businesses of people that I really respect. I think that's, yeah, another one of my favorite things about what I do.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, in the most general terms, whatever you feel is appropriate, kind of start to finish, like someone brings you in for a job, and you can give an example of whatever kind of job you want.
Yeah.
What's the process, start to finish?
Yeah, usually someone will, you know, approach me, say they want to start a small business, like a barber shop or something like that. Uh, Sometimes they come prepared with a logo. Other times I will draft something, a real quick 5-10 minute thumbnail sketch, like looks like something on the back of a napkin, and be like, hey, do you want something laid out like this? Maybe I'll show them some examples of styles. I do a lot of gold leaf lettering, and so I always try to be like, hey, this would be a really cool option for gold leaf if you have the budget for it. And so I'll show different examples of things from either my portfolio, or I'll show examples from old sign painting books. Be like, hey, this would be really cool, because inside I'm like, oh, I really want to paint something like this. Let's make this like your thing. And then they'll either be like yay or nay. And when we all kind of decide what is a good thing for their business, I will then usually draft a scale pattern. So like I'll literally take like a 4-foot tall roll of paper, roll it out on my easel, and sometimes I'll use my projector and transparencies, like, you know, some of us remember from school, and project that straight onto my paper. I do that a lot for logos or real specific illustrations and stuff that needs to be really exact. Draft it out at scale. I'll perforate my lines with what's called an electric pounce, because I have a steel easel. And I do this I have a pencil that is connected to my easel that sends a little shock through it and burns a little hole in the paper. So when you pull it away, you can see that it's perforated, and I can put chalk or charcoal, and that's how I put up my design. And then when I'm on site, or even if I'm working on something that's inside the shop, I have my blank board. I'll put that directly, that paper pattern directly onto the board or the window or the wall, whatever it may be. I'll use chalk or charcoal depending on the background color. And then I have all of my outline of the piece that I'm going to paint. So it's pretty intentioned. There's certain projects where I'll just go up to a window and I'll just draft something out with a pencil. If it's a trusted client, like I can do that. Or if they specifically are asking for that, I can do that. But most of the time I try to give people, you know, a lot of examples or like a good thumbnail and as well as like final approval on the pattern, just to make sure that, you know, there's no ambiguity in what people want. And then from there, I paint. So, yeah.
Now, you'd say most of your clients like likely come to you, like 90% come to you
Mm-hmm.
from like word of mouth or literally have observing you.
Yeah.
I'd imagine there must be some element of people coming to you thinking they want something and you having to kind of like educate, might sound like, I don't mean to be dismissive of them, but like teach them about the industry, what you do. And then sometimes that might even lead to you not doing work for them. Is that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that does happen. And I I think most of the time we find like a good middle ground. There's rarely jobs where I'm like, I'm just gonna have to pass on this. You should get like this, or this to do that. Sometimes if it's really, really small and delicate and like a lot of words, I'd be like, look, I could do this, but it's going to be cost prohibitive. You should get somebody to, you know, like screen it or do a mask or something like that. Like it would save you thousands of dollars and you might like the effect better. So there has been occasion for that. And most of the time I feel pretty good about that because I don't want to, you know, paint a bunch of computer generated fonts for hours and hours. Like that's not really what I do. Like it is what I do, but it's also not what I do, if that makes sense. Like I would rather take that time and paint like a beautiful design and do like a gold leaf window with like some pictorial flowers or something like that for somebody than do like hours of Helvetica that just came straight from the computer and just to do it by hand just cuz like it doesn't always translate, and we live in a world where, you know, computers do exist and there are other ways of doing it. And so like not every sign needs to be a hand painted sign.
Yeah, that goes back a little bit to what you said earlier. It's not like a good or a bad. It's just this is like a valid form of reaching out to people that has its place. But there's also places for like, great, get your vinyl sign printed. There's not a bad thing about it. Let's talk about pay though.
Yeah.
How have you learned how to charge your worth?
That's hard. It really has been a hard fought thing. I think things that were fortunate in my education and my you know business you know learning curve. I have tried to do other businesses before in the past for different things, completely unrelated. And I also did an apprenticeship with like a working sign painter for 2 years and talked in depth and saw what worked and didn't work. I also worked part-time after that for a sign shop here in the city, and they still are to this day very transparent about pricing. And I learned how to bid jobs accurately while being an apprentice and while later working at the sign shop, understanding the cost of materials and the time. And that's how you bid a job, is you estimate how much time it's going to take you, and what the material costs are going to be. And we, as a collective unit of sign painters in the Bay Area specifically, but I think probably pretty generally, tend to get along with each other and communicate. Like I don't know of any sign painters except for maybe a couple of older folks that I just haven't met yet, that still actively work as sign painters in the Bay Area. We'll talk about our pricing with each other so that we can kind of be close. We all have we offer different things. We offer different kind of styles, if you will. We have different overheads. So the pricing isn't going to be 100% the same, but I think that it's definitely a more of a collaborative group of folks compared to a competitive set of sign painters that are really trying to kind of like outbid one another. Yeah.
So when you started like out on your own, so
Mhm.
you're no longer working for anyone else,
Yeah.
were you already comfortable with like being like, this is my price and what it is? Or did you have to kind of like learn to?
I had to learn because, honestly, in a perfect world, I would probably do a lot of it for free. Like if I'd be like, oh, you want me to do that? That's awesome. I would love to do that. Great. And so asking for money was always something that was really hard for me. And it took me a long time to get to the point where I now am just very communicative about money and really upfront and almost sound harsh. Be like, okay, cool. Like before we go any further, I take a $200 non-refundable deposit, and that will be, attributed to the final product if we move forward. If not, sorry, like this is the deal. And I'll give you an exact quote of what this is going to cost. And if the scope of the work changes, the cost will also change. And, getting the money stuff out of the way makes it easier. It makes everybody more comfortable. There's no like anxiety about it. There's no unexpected what ifs and that kind of stuff. And it took me that part, honestly, if I'm being honest, is I'm still working on that. And that's probably going to be a forever process for me, because every once in a while I'll be like excited about a project and just jump in and be like, oh, I'm not even going to worry about taking a deposit. And then that's the one that I'll get like burnt on. I'll put like hours into it and they'll be like, oh, we're going to change this, or we're just going to hold off on this for a little bit. And you're just like, oh, I thought I learned this lesson, but no. So yeah, it's a process.
Why do you think it's tough for you though? The money side.
I find it uncomfortable for one, like I always have. I really don't know. I don't know if there's like a weird like punk ethos part of it where I'm like, oh, money, evil. Like I don't want to be like corporate greedy overlord guy. But it's like, this is what I do. Like I'm spending money to like do this too. Like it's not like, yeah. So I have to kind of rein that in, I guess. And I can't just do stuff for free all the time. And sometimes I do, but it'll be like, I'll do stuff for like a nonprofit or something and be like, okay, I'll donate my time for this. Like, that's great, but I can't donate my time to your business. I'm sorry.
The reason I'm asking so much about this is like one of the things that people ask me about the most around the podcast or comment on the most is when I have people talk about their pricing and how they came up with it.
Yeah.
Because it's like the worst.
Yeah.
Like if you love what you do and you like helping people, like you genuinely like, and it could be painting signs or it could be doing coaching or whatever it is you do.
Yeah.
Like therapists, like my background is therapy, like therapists going on their own. It's like they almost want to give it away, right? It's so hard to charge. If you like what you do, you care, you're kind of a people person. Almost to a person that talks to me about the podcast, they almost always like, oh my God, that time that person talked about pricing and how they came up with it. It's like exactly what I needed to hear.
Yeah.
It sucks though. Like,
yeah, it's a really hard thing. And yeah, and every time I'm like, oh, maybe is it time to raise my hourly rate a little bit? Oh, I don't know. And like for some clients I do, some clients I don't. And like, oh man, I can't keep painting signs for this person at this price. Like it's just, you know, like that's what I charged 7 years ago. Like things have changed. Wood has doubled in price. I can't I can't paint a sign for you for the same price. I'm sorry.
Can I share something about my business?
Yeah, please.
The first time, not the first time we did like kind of a bigger company retreat, where like the first couple times we did company retreats, they were just like me and like three other people. But the first time we did one where it was like, oh, like, wow, the company's grown. My team had like almost like a mutiny with me where they're like, we have to charge more money.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I can't. I don't want to. And they were like, no. And they forced me to like, not double, but like significantly raise the prices.
Yeah.
And I had like, it felt like an emotional hangover for the rest of the time. I was like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? Like, this is so bad. And then I started getting into like weird thinking, like the clients are gonna like go away. I'm gonna let everyone down. And like clients didn't even blink at all.
Right. Yeah.
Didn't even think. But then throughout the years, every time we get to a place where it's like, as you said, wood doubles, right? Well, it's like all of the things for all of the things are going up. Some of them like wood doubles, but things can go up marginally, or you know, we try and be an ethical employer. So like the way that we do things around healthcare or benefits or anything like that, those all go up. So when we have to raise prices, it does not get easier. And like we just raised prices this year just by a teeny bit. I had a freaking heart attack about it, man.
Yeah, every time, like, I have so much anxiety around my emails, just like in general. Like, it turns into this like just terrible thing where like I hear it like ding, and I'm like, oh, like I need to do these things and be responsive to like do my job. And a lot of it has to do with because I need to do bids. I'm like, oh man, I have like 4 jobs to bid right now. Like, I just can't face it. I have to like wake up in the morning and do it when I'm like energized. And like it's just probably the hardest thing for me is being responsive with my emails when it comes to doing a bid, especially if it's a job that like I really want, or like just like I don't want to disappoint people. I don't want to like, be rejected outright. I don't want to seem weird, and it's just yeah.
So I know this is a tough ask because I'm going to ask you to do something kind of across industries, but if you had just any kind of advice that you could offer to people who are out on their own, so specifically people who are starting their own thing, they're trying to be independent or start a small little company, specifically around pricing and kind of like really like honoring yourself with your pricing, what would that advice be?
I think being realistic is important and being consistent. So consistency would be like just for using what I do as an example, like I said, the cost of materials and then your hourly rate, like what your time costs. Also understanding with the way that I work, I'm not like charging 9 to 5 hourly rate. Like, it's, per project. How much time am I going to be spending on this? And trying to actually be realistic about that. And that way you can kind of like see what the real value of your product is. And I think that's the only way to be sustainable, is like trying to accurately assess the value of whatever your product, being your time or your knowledge. And also taking into consideration, you're not charging for just like me specifically, my hourly rate charged is, incorporating the years of practice and knowledge that I have about this stuff, the specific brushes that I have, stuff that I don't necessarily consider like the supply cost. Like I need to like incorporate all of that. And that's, like my hourly rate is not the lowest of the people in the Bay Area, and I have to be okay with that. I've been maybe doing it longer, and that's important to honor that. I don't want to be working so hard, so much, and barely scraping by, because I'm not honoring that. So,
What, like everything you just said there, I feel is like really important for anyone who's kind of out on their own or starting a small business to hear, and especially that last piece, that honoring your expertise, the time that you've you've spent. And, you know, most people understandably are uncomfortable being like, I'm an expert.
Right.
You know, like very few people when they say that are comfortable with saying that. And I'm not asking people to like run out the door and start yelling that they're an expert. But when you're positioning yourself in like, if you're offering something to someone, that should come through in how you're pricing yourself. And, you know, if you're thinking about pitching a job or like doing any kind of work, leading with the understanding that you're offering something that's really valuable based on a lot of hours and sweat and thought and creativity into putting something that is special, that should be reflected in your pricing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, like you can honor your expertise and still understand that you have a lot to learn. Like I am learning stuff every day and enjoy learning stuff every day. And you know, we'll talk to sign painters that have been around longer or people that do a lot of real fine gold leaf work that know so much more about techniques and methods and materials and have other cool ideas about how to do stuff and design stuff that I just haven't absorbed yet or been able to absorb fully or had the time to do a deep dive in. But like you can still honor the time that you have spent and just know that there's always more to learn. So yeah, you can be an expert in your field and still have, you know, a whole mountain of knowledge to gain. So
That you may never gain.
and you may never gain, yeah, for sure.
I love that. You totally hit on it. I completely agree. You cool if we shift into you now?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
so how did you get into this industry, man? Like, what's your story?
Yeah. So yeah, what is my story? I think I mean I mentioned earlier that the seed was kind of planted when I was talking to my friend who was tattooing me, and I was like, yeah, there's still people who are traditional sign painters. Like that's awesome. Like I love the aesthetic. I love like everything about it. Just really like energized me even then, and like it just kind of was like in the back of my head for a really long time. I studied weird stuff in college. I was a history major, but I really focused on 20th century American cultural history and spent a lot of time studying like hobo culture, hobo graffiti, and like folk art in general and folk music, and like all of these people were sign painters. Woody Guthrie was a sign painter. Muhammad Ali's dad was a sign painter. Like I just like it just like kind of kept coming to me and was just building. And I was like, oh, I bought some brushes, bought some paint, and like played around with it, and was like, oh, this is really hard. Like I don't get it. Like would put it down for a while, and do other stuff. You know, like was really focused on just like racing bikes for a long time, or like playing in bands for a long time. And then you know, I was working for FSAP, which is the business end of PETA, and I was I was hating it. It was just like spreadsheets, like sitting in front of a computer. It was cool working for an organization that I felt like, you know, was doing good work and a necessary organization. And I was like, you know what, like working in nonprofit is not my future. This is not my career. Um, and I had put out feelers with some friends that I knew that were closer friends with Derek, who ran Golden West Sign Arts in Berkeley, who is like actually, you know, my age. And I knew kind of tangentially through like earlier graffiti stuff. And I was just like kept like going in and like bugging him, being like, hey, can I like do an apprenticeship? And at first he was like, no, like I got another guy who's coming in sometimes. And I was like, oh. And so I like, you know, kept kind of bugging him. And then finally he was like, yeah, you can come in, you know, like I'll like show you some strokes and alphabets and that kind of stuff. And that was it. Like I would go in once a week, like religiously, to just kind of prove to myself and prove to him that I was serious about it. I quit my job at PETA and was helping my wife, who was doing like a bookkeeping company at the time, and was just kind of like poorly helping her to earn some income during that time, but was just really focused on like, this is what I want to do, and so I'm gonna do it, and just like did the deep dive. And he's like, you've been coming in a lot, you're doing better, like, can you help me on this job, I'll pay you. And I'm like, yes, I'm earning as a sign painter, let's do it. And so that was kind of my entry. And then I had also reached out during that time early on to the sign shop here in San Francisco called New Bohemia. And there was this time period where Derek moved and closed his shop. And I was like, what should I do now? So I had checked back in with New Bohemia, and they're like, oh, we could totally use you. And I was like, awesome. But at the same time, Derek started referring me to people that were reaching out to him to do signs locally. And so I kind of like, I didn't have to do a hard start ever. Like I did this like slow slide from, because I was working at New Bohemia in the city part-time, and then doing my own stuff, mostly referred to by Derek, and was able to kind of like build my business. And also with, people that I knew that were starting businesses that knew that that's what I was doing. Like, yeah, like just weird Bay Area stuff. Like the very first wall sign that I painted was for a tattoo shop for Sammy Town, who is the singer of Fang, who is terrifying, kind of, like, if you know his backstory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I'll paint a sign for you. Like, I really hope I don't mess this one up. But like, just like weird stuff like that started coming up. Like I painted a lot of signs for Al, who has Crimson, and she's married to Ben Sizemore from Iconochrist. Like, just there's like, everything just seems to be kind of interconnected like that for me, for my business life. So
Let's take a step back.
yeah.
So what did you think you were going to do as a career?
My mom actually told me as an adult, I don't remember having this conversation, but she said that I said that I wanted to be a hobo. And I used to like go around with like a rucksack.
Like when you were a little kid?
Yeah, and want to like hop trains and stuff. And it's like, cool, I kind of did that. Like, and I'm kind of doing that still.
Right.
But like when it came to adulthood, man, like I have a distinct memory of being in high school, and I could not see myself past the age of 18. Not because I was like, suicidal, or like there's just a barrier there. Like I couldn't fathom what life was going to be like. And I knew that I, wanted to do something that I found valuable and that would keep my attention. And I tried a lot of things. I spent a lot of time just trying to be in a band and on tour all the time. I spent a lot of time as a bike messenger, which also dovetailed really nicely with being in a band all the time, because you could hop in and out of being a bike messenger really easily. Like you could always get a job doing that when you were in town. Worked at bike shops. I enjoyed being a bike mechanic. I thought that was great. I did my own bike messenger company for a while. That was kind of like the first business I ever tried to do. And I tried to utilize like my collegiate part of me by doing the stuff for FSAP, and that was the worst out of all of it. Like, there's some people that love it and can do it, and that's just their thing, and that was just like every day it was just like a disingenuous me like showing up. Like I loved like all the stuff and like the vegan potlucks that were happening, but like the actual work part of it, like it was just not me.
The reason I'm asking is like, I think like, you know, there's people who just know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
They just totally know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And then there's a ton of people who are like, I think you positioned it beautifully. It's not like people are like suicidal or depressed or anything, but it's just like, I don't know what adult me is. Like I have no idea what me past 18 is, or me past 21 or 25. And that idea of getting stuck, I've become a little fascinated with that. It's like coming from punk and hardcore, it's like you kind of meet these like just unbelievably talented, like basically genius people who kind of get stuck.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they get stuck in punk or stuck in this or stuck in that. They just get stuck in life. And it's like, there's so many people that, like, sadly, some of them aren't with us anymore. And then some of them kind of drifted away, and, you know, different kind of stories. But just people are like, damn, like, you don't need to do something like big career to be happy. It's not that, but it's like, I don't think you're happy doing this. I think you're stuck.
Right.
And that idea of getting stuck, but people who are like willing to get unstuck, were like, no. I'm not going to be the disingenuous me. I'm not going to like just park myself at some job that I hate, but I need to make money. Nor am I going to like be a little kid for the rest of my life. I've got to be doing something that matters to me.
Yeah.
And that taking a leap of faith and betting on yourself is like, I love so much of this story, but that part where you're like, oh no, I actually just liked this thing. And kind of as an adult, I quit my paying job to go just bet on myself. Yeah. That's a cool part of the story.
It was really scary. I wouldn't have been able to do it if I didn't have a supportive partner. You know, we had a small kid at that time too. And like, you know, shout out to my wife for seeing that what I was doing was not like gonna be what I needed to be doing. Like she grew up in a house with, you know, a dad who like went to work every day, hated his job and was miserable. And like she's like, we're not gonna have this life. I don't want that to be you. And gave me permission to take that leap. And it was big and scary at the time, for sure. I tried to set up like some scaffolds for it, but like, you know, you got to take the plunge, and I did, and it was hard, and I faced a lot of rejection and frustration and like uncertainty, and like it was downright depressing. But I'm so, you know, glad that I did. But again, I couldn't have done it without supportive people in my life.
And I think most of us couldn't do it without those people. And it's like, it's a really cool story. The reason I wanted to back you up to that, because you're like, oh, and I kind of like slid into this career where it's like, no way, man. Like there was a lot of stuff involved.
For sure. Yeah. It was a solid 2 years before I started to have like any semblance of like a business, for sure. So
it makes me think of RJ when he started Timeless. And kind of like, if you talk to him about it, he can just make it like, oh yeah, I worked at like Cyclass for a while, and then I started this thing. It's like, dude, like you bet on yourself. You took a huge leap. You did a lot of stuff. You were in the grind. Like, you really took a leap and built something super special. And I think people need to hear those stories a bit more. Like what you just said, when you're like, actually, yeah, like this was scary. Betting on yourself is terrifying. And it doesn't always work out. And it comes with the privilege of having people who can support you and being in a certain position in life where you can take those leaps. But if you're lucky enough to be in those spaces, doing that and betting it all just to try and be happy and do something fulfilling, there's nothing better than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is another component to it with, for me, being in like a traditional job, is just unsustainable. Like I just couldn't do it. Like, you know, I don't know if it's like I contribute it to like having ADD or something like that. Like I think that there's some people who just can't do it. And I think I realized that was me, and I needed to figure my shit out. I needed to see what I could do to survive. And that's what it was going to take.
It's so I think it's super important for people to hear that because like, I know a lot of people come from so many different circumstances, and not everybody's in the position to be able to do what you've done, what I've been able to do, what other people can do to go out and kind of like do that bet on yourself. But I gotta encourage people here that there's so many different ideas of work and work can be, and you don't have to get stuck in something you hate. In many cases, there are options.
Yeah.
And for those times there aren't options, that's also a reality too. But like, if you are lucky enough to have options, explore those options. There's like a wild world of work out there that's like, working and being productive is such an important part of the human experience. But like, doing your best to not get stuck and live in misery, like I think there's almost nothing more important than trying to get out of being stuck.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Yeah, and it was obviously a big turning point in my life. Um, to take that leap and on something that seemed so kind of wild and bizarre to anybody. If you're like gonna tell them what you're gonna be doing, like you're like, oh cool, that's like a cool hobby, like
Totally.
yeah. And I'm like, no, it's a industry, like this is happening, like I'm in it, I'm doing it, this is what I'm gonna do.
Well, like when Ross brought you up for the podcast, he brought up two people. He was like,
Yeah.
oh, here's this like guy that I know who works at Deloitte, and he gave me his whole background. I was like, wow, that sounds like someone I want to talk to. And he's like, and let me tell you about Pat. Like, I think you know Pat. And he gave me your whole background, and I was like, these are such totally wild, different things, but both are super cool stories. And like, that idea was like, sounds like a cool hobby. It's like, no, this is like this really time-honored, really incredible way of expressing yourself, helping people connect with their clients, but also changing a city and changing a landscape.
Yeah.
I find it super fascinating. But let's talk about you personally.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I know is a very important part of your story is your family and the makeup of your family. So what do you want to share about that?
Sure. Yeah. Like I entered parenthood by the time I was probably old enough to, but still felt too young, and was like, okay, I've entered this phase in my life. Cool. I find myself enjoying being a parent. Like this is a cool new component to my identity. And then immediately, almost after, I ended up, divorcing my wife at the time, and a lot of moving around in turmoil, and ended up getting remarried. And the talk of, growing our family and having, uh, uh, an addition to our family was brought up, and we were like, well, why don't we explore fostering? Like, let's just look at it, because we're already parenting, and let's see if we can channel that like desire to maybe grow our family by helping out kids that might be in need, and let's just like learn about it. And so we did, and we went to what was like essentially like a county sponsored foster parent recruiting thing, and they tell you all of these awful statistics, and like you basically go away like crying, like signing up for this thing. Like there's like I don't remember what the specific statistics were, but they were astronomical between the disparity of foster uh, houses available versus the need was like 40 to 1 or something, just in Alameda County where Oakland is. Um, and the overwhelming majority of families who find themselves entangled in social services are, low income families of color. And we're like, okay, this might be another cool way to do like some anti-racist action, and help try to keep families together by keeping children of color in Oakland, because if there's not an available house, these kids get shipped to like the Central Valley, like Stockton, Bakersfield, even, And one of the main components that's required for families to regain custody of their kids is consistent visitation. And these kids are getting shipped to Bakersfield, and foster families are not obligated to facilitate, visitation. It's the onus is on the biological parent. And so, as you can imagine, someone who's struggling to the point where their kids are getting entangled in, the foster care system and social services, often do not have the wherewithal or the means to go to Bakersfield to make these visits. And that was like a big motivator for us to do this, right? So we sign up, we do all the real invasive home study stuff. Like they like really look at you under a magnifying glass, and they're like, to the point, it's like really antiquated. They're like, oh, it says here that you're in therapy. And we had to be like, oh, it wasn't really therapy. It was like a, a visit with our like pastor before we got married to make sure that we were compatible. And they're like, okay. But like if we would have said that, like, we routinely go to therapy, they would have been like, maybe you're not a suitable foster parent. Like stuff that just feels like mind-bogglingly like outdated and bizarre. Like this was 2016, and we were kind of primed by some friends of ours who had started the foster process before and like warned us about that kind of stuff. But like that whole thing was really like just an aside and just like an interesting thing. But like, you know, um, you have to take all of these like classes and trainings, and they really hammer it in that like, okay, we love that you're doing this, but this is not a good pathway to adoption. Like it does happen, but like if you're in it to adopt, like it's not going to happen. And we're like, cool, we're not in it to adopt. Like we just want to like, open our house up to a baby for a week or a weekend or something like that until they can like get things sorted out, which was kind of what we thought we were going to be doing. But, our reality turned out to be totally different. We got our first placement and we were like, oh, like, okay, like this is happening. We're going to go down to this like secret pickup location and take home this like small frightened child who was a 9-month girl, and she became our adopted daughter 3 years later. We tried for about 3 years to help facilitate reunification, and it was really hard, and it didn't pan out.
And could you explain reunification?
Yeah, reunification with our daughter's bio family. So I personally know, her father pretty well, her bio father, and have met her bio mother because of various attempts at reunification. Mostly in a controlled, supervised environment through social services. Um, but yeah, for all of the common reasons, like them being unhoused, severe mental illness and addiction, incarceration, all of those are components to my daughter's situation with her bio family. And after a certain point, we are the family that she knows, and it turned in to a pre-adoption situation, and then we officially adopted her. And we're like, wow, that was a wild ride. We're never doing that again. Like we, didn't renew our foster license. We're like that was taxing. We wouldn't change it for the world, but we can't do that. And then last year on December 29th, we get a call from social services saying, hey, we have a little baby in the NICU that is your daughter's half brother, and he needs a home. And we're like, Jesus Christ, like that's what do you do with that kind of call? Um, we only lived 4 blocks or 10 blocks technically away from the hospital at the time. And so we called back and we were like, okay, we don't really know what we're doing, but we really feel like we should at least come visit this guy. As kind of a side note, one thing that was really hard for me that happened during the adoption process of our daughter was you get to read all the background, you get to read police reports, you get as much information in history. And I discovered that she spent like weeks alone in uh, in the NICU. And that was obviously really hard for me to think about. Like, I don't know why it's so triggering for me, but even still now, like, I can't even talk about it. And so I was like, okay, the least I can do is not let this happen to this little guy. And so we're like, oh, shit, let's go to the fucking NICU and go visit this guy. We can't commit to taking him. We have, at that time, a 2-bedroom apartment, 4-story walk up with 2 kids and a dog. And like, we really cannot take another placement right now. But you know, we heard his story from the nurses, which was that, you know, he was essentially born in an encampment, extremely premature, on the side of a freeway. Witnesses saw a woman holding a bloody bundle and called 911. He was found dead on arrival, was resuscitated for over an hour, life flighted, and miraculously, you know, is here and doing the thing. And it, you know, it just, as much as our pragmatic minds were like, we can't do this, like we did it. And he came home to us like what, less, like about a week and a half later, he was released as soon as he weighed over 4 pounds, because he was tiny, like unknown amount of prematurity because there was no record of prenatal care or anything like that. They had just figured out after he had been in the hospital for about 3 weeks what his, you know, parentage was, and they made the connection to our daughter. And so, yeah, he ended up coming home to us, and that's our crazy family story. And not the most intentional way of building a family, honestly. But I think, you know, we were naive in a lot of ways about what we were getting ourselves into. And yeah, it was, you know, hard, but valuable, hard lessons, and has helped us kind of continue to reflect what our values are and what our identities are. And yeah, it's so fraught and complicated. And I don't, you know, I don't wish that I had just like, you know, a traditional nuclear family where everyone is biologically related or anything. But it's, we have to deal with things like, you know, trauma and health concerns that, you know, maybe other families don't have to deal with in the same way. And yeah, yeah, that's the the story of my current family.
And thank you for sharing that. And like, dude, thanks for just being like a person about it, like being real about it. The reason I'm bringing it up for anyone who's wondering, like, because, you know, I don't always go into people's family
Yeah.
history, but in your pre-interview with Monica, it had been something that you had brought up, and you were really, you know, it really mattered to Monica that they brought up. And then when I was reading the notes, I was like, damn, like we should talk about this.
Yeah.
Because you hit a lot of angles, and only to the level of comfort you want to talk about it. But you had talked about like the anti-racist action of it, which I just find so like, the fact that you're even putting yourself in that mindset, it just like moves me a lot, of the idea of like, hey, we know that these kids are vulnerable, and they're coming from a vulnerable population, people who are in the system for who interact with the system for whatever reason. The parents are in a vulnerable position, the kids are in a vulnerable position, and the idea that they will get split up entirely unless someone local does that, and that idea of like that involvement can be an expression of anti-racist action, in the sense of like we're trying to create a condition where families can stay together, and that people can be connected to their culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I'd love to. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it needs to be addressed after opening the door earlier. Yeah. Like it's uh I think our attempt at doing some sort of positive anti-racist action almost backfired in a certain respect, because we are now two white parents of two Latino children, um, and have little to no connection to their birth culture, and there's no way that we can make up for that. It's just impossible, and it's a huge um, contradiction in how we're living, and it's hard to really fully reconcile. Like circumstance had like understandably and kind of made our family come together in the way that it has, and at the same time, uh, it is it is not ideal. Like it's been a really hard thing for us to negotiate, and it's required us to do a lot of deep dives and try to educate ourselves, and try to make sure that despite that huge pitfall, that we're not unwittingly, to the best of our knowledge, creating other barriers. There's a lot of resources out there that are from an interracial adoptee perspective. So from a child's perspective, say of a person of color who was adopted into a white family, um, and all you have to do is talk to these people. They have like social media platforms, and you can, like on Facebook, be like, hey, this is the situation, how would you have felt in this situation? And I think that's kind of the least that we can do, honestly. And and one thing that I was really like, I think I touched on a little bit when I was talking to Monica about this, is that a lot of times when I start to tell our story, the knee jerk reaction is to be like, oh, you guys are doing a wonderful thing. And it doesn't feel like it. Like, I don't agree that what we're doing is a wonderful thing. I think that what we're doing is necessary. I love my kids. I'm happy to take care of them. Um, but uh, we had the agency to adopt and to foster. They did not. And so there's a power dynamic, and I can't reconcile that with my values. and I can't make that up to them. But I can talk about it. I can be as transparent with them as possible, and transparent with everybody who wants to talk to me about it as possible, about the reality of the situation, and that, white savior or foster savior mentality, which often is the white savior mentality, is extremely detrimental to society in general, but on an individual basis to these kids who had no agency in their life. Like you can't expect someone to oh, aren't you should be so grateful for this family taking you in, or something like that. Like, you never asked for any of that. Like, why should you be grateful? Like, that's a dynamic that I think is really harmful and almost hateful, and is probably one of the biggest reasons why adopted children have like an astronomically higher suicide rate, substance abuse problems, behavioral issues. Like, they're thrust into a situation that they had no control over, but are expected to be grateful.
Yeah, so what you're saying, like, I think, and for any listener who's listening to this and being like, well, what's the alternative? Like, I think this specifically this topic, people might want to throw their hands up and get into binary thinking.
Right.
Well, it's better than people not having a family. It's like getting into binary thinking of good versus bad is like a toxic way of looking at something like this, because like it's both.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it reminds me of something that someone had said to me very early on in my my work in the social services, when someone had said, "Hey man, I was saying something like early career stupid, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like something, like basically it was like addiction savior kind of thing. Like we're gonna say like whatever stupid thing I was saying.
Right. Yeah.
And someone was like, "Hey man, if you look at yourself as the solution to anyone's problem, you're not helping anyone."
Right.
And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" They're like, if you think the complexity of life, someone's life circumstances that led them to come work with an addiction therapist, and you're the person who then slam dunks it, and so if you think that there's some kind of like magic bullet or magic wand that you have, you're not fit to do this work.
Right.
Basically, they're like, we are honored to work with people for a certain amount of time. And if you think of the journey of addiction or mental wellness or like life stability as like a journey of thousands of steps, you should be honored to walk with someone for 300 steps or 200 steps or 500 steps or 3 steps. Your job isn't to fix people's problems. Your job is to help along the path to them discovering and kind of firming up their own solutions to their own life, including also if people just want to kind of just stay-ish in the same space, but they want their life to be a little less challenging or a little bit difficult, or want someone to talk to. And it was great to hear that early career. It was like a real shot across the bow, where I was like, oh shit, like why did I get into this industry? Like, did I come in here because I want to like pat myself on the back and be like, I'm a good person?
Right.
And if I'm going to be like really honest, where I grew up and how I grew up, like I think at the core of it, there was a bit of, I want to feel I'm a good person.
Mm-hmm.
And then wherever that I can get that feeling is what I want to do. And it was so good to get that feedback early career. And it was not delivered in a nice way, but it was delivered in like a harsh way. It really made me think. It's like, hey man, if the result is that if I feel fulfilled from my job, that should be the result of what I'm doing, not the like, I'm such a good person.
Right.
And I think it's important, it is important to be able to have these conversations about like really unpacking why we're doing something and how that could have like toxic results for someone, or how a system is built to kind of like create power dynamics where people should be like so grateful for the people who are creating situations. When in reality, it's like, hey man, like if someone doesn't have the agency to make these decisions, you really got to walk cautiously and be able to unpack those things. So I again, for anyone who's listening who's like kind of trying to get into binary thinking, I just want to encourage you to like break out of that and think like it's a bunch of stuff, but the one thing, it's not as good or bad. It's like a mix of things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been if anything, it's been an educational opportunity for us. And also, I think it's important because, to draw some parallels to what you were saying, I think it's good to frame it as a form of harm reduction, opposed to like rehabilitation. If you need to have a kind of a framework, I think you can look at it maybe like that. Like, there are situations where kids are in danger, and I think it's important to provide a loving, safe home for kids who are in danger, for sure. Um, but you can't expect to get fulfillment as a person, just because your role is to provide safety for these kids. Like that, it can't you can't work like that and not have a negative effect on kids.
Yeah, and I do believe that fulfillment and that kind of like, oh, like, this feels right. That can be like a result of that. But if that's like your leading thing, like
Right.
I'm doing this to fulfill myself,
Right.
like that seems fraught with a hazardous payload that comes with it.
Yeah, I think across the board, you're going to wind up with, disappointment at best and real, like life or death problems at worst. So yeah, it's been I've learned a lot of valuable things. I've learned a lot of things about myself. I think I tend to be a more extreme person. Like, I think maybe you can relate to that. Like, being vegan, being straight edge are kind of extreme stances on things, and sometimes reactionary, and mean different things to you as you get older or different phases in your life. Um, and I've spent most of my adult life, um, I think, um, I live the same values that I think I've had, since I became a kind of aware teenager and trying to find my path. But I've become more, I've become less black and white, and I haven't become necessarily less extreme, for better or for worse, because I really do think that, the extreme in life is needed, to counterplay the extreme of the other side, in order to find that balance. But I think that I've discovered merit and the reality that the world we live in, is actually all of these things at the same time. Um, and that's good, I think. I think it shows growth. Um, but it doesn't make your life easier. It makes it, um, more confusing and harder emotionally, I think.
Let's take a step, just kind of thinking about like the community, because
Yeah.
throughout our whole conversation, there's been just like a lot of talk about the community.
Yeah.
And like the landscape and the space you're in, the community that you're part of, and going anywhere from like, I want it to be a cool, interesting place that looks cool and has like interesting, all the way to like, hey, I'm thinking about the people in my community and their families and their kids and how people live lives. What's important about like really being invested in your community to you?
I think it's the the core tenet of, the world that I want to see is, um, an investment in community. I think that, like, I truly believe that is what ultimately, matters. I think that, um, you could be a completely isolated person in your controlled environment, living far away from anyone else, doing everything that you think you would exactly love to do. You would be an unfulfilled person and an ultimately unsafe person. Um, I think as humans, we need a strong and vibrant community to exist, like raising children, keeping each other safe, learning. Um, and I really think I try to live with a focus on that being the world that I want to live in, and try to push towards that world that I do want to see. So yeah, I think like community is number one. And I think that, again, that's a really vague term. Like, what is community? Is community your neighbors? Is community your subculture? Is community your work world and your coworkers? And I mean, it's all of it, obviously. Um, and what you do in your community and what you can expect from your community can vary based on what you have to offer, what your needs are, and um, I like the idea of um, people acting, outside of like a centralized command structure or whatever, and rallying together to do great things. Like that's like probably like pinnacle of inspiration for me. And so I try to like do that in little bits whenever I can. Um, so that's like, I think that that's like, if I had to really break it down to what like the core of my definition of community would be, and that would be it. Like, you know, collectively come together on whatever level you're talking about and do great things for everybody, mutually beneficial.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more question, then we're going to go into the final
Let's
three.
do it.
Okay. There's a lot of intention in how you do your business and the relationships you have with your clients and the relationships you have with other people who are in your industry. There's a lot of intention about how you conduct yourself in your space and the way you look at art. There's a lot of intention of how you have your family relationships and your friendships. How do you manage your relationship with yourself with the same intention? How do you take care of yourself?
It's hard and ever changing. I think often the self will get neglected. I think a lot of time I feel like I have a lot of spinning plates, and don't have the time or the luxury to do that check-in until you get to that almost burnout level. And that's something that I really want to try to work on, for sure. I think in a lot of ways I'm pretty lucky in that I get a lot of like positive juice out of what I do. And I think if I was doing any other job, my life and lifestyle probably wouldn't be sustainable. Um, I mean, like the ages of my kids are very dispersed and their needs are very unique and different. And my personal email inbox is like almost unmanageable because of like, different school events or different requirements, or you got to pay the fee for this trip, or like it can be a lot. And so sometimes it's hard to take that time out to do that check-in. But I mean, I try to, and I try to also bask in the moments when I realize that I'm feeling good, and like check in and be like, why am I feeling good? Like, what about right now is good, and sit and enjoy that moment. Kind of like my own weak attempt at mindfulness, because uh, that's kind of the closest that I feel like I've ever come to those kind of moments, and be like, oh, so I'm up here painting this wall sign in spring, and I hear the birds chirping, and everything's really quiet and still right now, and this is like great. Like I can kind of like love my life. Or I'm sitting here watching my daughter do swim lessons, and she's like, I've realized all of a sudden that she's like comfortable in the water. That's awesome. Like I'm enjoying myself right now. Like, and just try to make those moments last for as long as I can. Um, don't know if that answered your question
Totally
at
did.
all, but
No, it did, man. It did. All right, you ready for the final three?
yeah, let's do it.
Okay, they're going to get harder as we go along. The last one's going to be, maybe the last one will be easy for you.
Okay.
But we'll see.
Okay.
All right, so around work specifically, what's something that you learned about yourself throughout your process that you really had to work on? Like you're like, oh, I don't like that. I've got to work on it. But you've been able to successfully address it. So you're not still working on it. You've got it. You've addressed it.
Yeah, I think it's the main thing would be that I need to have systems and I need to have some semblance of organization. So like I need a to-do list and I need a calendar. Those are things that were really hard fought for me and like have become an absolute necessity. Like you can't just, it seems like you can't be an adult running a successful business without those kind of things. I can't keep it all in my head. I really want to keep it all in my head, but like I can't. And it took me a long time to feel comfortable doing that and making it habitual. And now it's habitual. So, like for our family, we do like a Sunday night weekly check-in where we go over what our schedule is, because usually I'm the one that's going to be in different places. And so we try to make sure that there's not going to be like gaps. So that forces me to have my schedule for the week in advance so that I'm not messing everybody else's schedule up. And that's been helpful. And, we're not always perfect, but at least it's like goals. It's probably the most adult thing I think we do, actually. But like, yeah, that's the number one thing for me with work is making sure that I have a to-do list and that I have a calendar and I have things calendared and scheduled and I can reconcile that with my inbox and make sure that, all of that stuff balances and matches.
Oh, yeah. All right. What's one thing that you've known about yourself that you're still working on and you actually haven't? You're working on it, or maybe having to start working on it, but you know you need to. What's the one thing in your process you know you need to fix?
Procrastination. Yeah, like if it feels hard, like I'm gonna procrastinate. And like part of what I do is a curse because I can be like, I'm gonna go paint this right now because I get a lot of juice out of painting this right now. But what I should be doing is bidding those jobs and responding to those emails. But I can trick myself into being like, I'm working, I'm getting work done, I'm doing this. And it's true, but it's not what I need to be doing. And yeah, I really need to like grow up in that realm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that, man.
Yeah.
All right, last one is our conversation was cool for me because like we both come from like punk and hardcore, both straight edge, vegan, all those things. And usually when I have someone on the show, we end up talking about that a bit, but we like just talked about it a little bit because like you've got a history in music, you play in a band, and as we're doing kind of like our outro, I want to make sure that you talk about that a bit.
Yeah.
But like usually I'll talk about it more, and I love that we didn't because we focused so much on other things. But here's my hard question.
Yeah.
Bay Area specific.
Okay.
3 greatest punk or hardcore records out of the Bay Area ever.
Oh my God, thoroughly unprepared for this. Oh man, Redemption 87, their whole catalog for sure for me. Just like inspiring, influential. This newest band took their name out of a Redemption 87 song. Yeah, the record, the full length that they put out on New Age is like one of my all times, definite Bay Area. And I gotta hit some weird, deeper cuts somewhere. I would probably have to put like Iconochrist in there. Like especially because of just like their whole aesthetic. Number one, I really love. I love Ben Sizemore. He does awesome work. And like it was one of the bands that really inspired me as like an early into that like borderline hardcore crust like Bay Area stuff. and like I don't want to say it, but it's like the truth is probably Jawbreaker, Dear You is another one that I just like.
Why wouldn't you want to say that, man?
Because there's got to be other ones too. Like three is really hard. Yeah, yeah. But like I don't know. Yeah. Final answer. I'll go with those ones.
Good for you. Very very respectful. Redemption '87 shows up often in these. Like if I talk to someone from the Bay Area, they almost always say Redemption '87.
And there's like a lot of really good Bay Area like metal that I've listened to and really love over the years too. And like, you know, we could go on forever about music, but like those are the ones that really popped into my head right now. So.
All right. I appreciate that. Thank you. I told you it was hard.
It is.
All right. As we're closing off, first tell people how they can find you as a business, and then tell us about your band as we're closing.
Sure. Yeah. I have a portfolio website page. Science-wonders.com is probably the easiest landing point, and that's just like pretty straightforward web page. Also Instagram, which is sign_syndicalist, SYNDICALIST.
Well, and so for everyone, if you're hearing this, we'll add links to all of your stuff so that people can see it. Tell us about your new band, because again, it's like how we even know each other is through music.
Yeah, for sure.
So tell us about the new band.
Yeah, so I'm doing a new band with Dwayne and Ross, former members of Allegiance, and Mike Quirk too. He was also in Allegiance, and like he also played in Set Your Goals. And Joey played Skin Like Iron, and currently is drumming for King Woman. All of it is like hardcore adjacent, whatever. Like really solid group of people, and we're playing like really just like what we want to play, which is probably hardcore inspired, but more like post-hardcore, even like weird Bay Area punk inspired, like a little bit Jawbreaker, a little bit like Crimpshine and like 15, and like that like 90s Gilman-y stuff that everybody really like resonates with, especially growing up, in and around the Bay Area. I think in the 90s, like, a lot of mixed bill show, you couldn't go to any shows without hearing that stuff and having it in your bones. So it's super fun to play that. It's like, I wouldn't say that it's not aggressive, because it is, but like it's just different. Maybe it's a more mature vibe, and I really love doing it. So we're playing our first show tomorrow.
What's the name of the band?
It's called Caged View.
Okay, so everybody, they just finished a demo that they're going to have out as well, and again, we'll put links and everything in there. Pat, this was an awesome conversation. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. We hit a lot of weird ups and downs. It was great.
It was a good conversation. I feel really good. Anything you want to say as we're closing off?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot. I'm like ready to like take a nap, I think.
Awesome, man. All right, everyone. I'll see you in the outro, and Mike, drop the beat.